Mr. Johnson, let me explain this again. Your mortgage is $1,000.
And I sent you two $500 bills.
That was monopoly money. Just like the 1,000 Bongo Burger bucks you sent last month, they're not worth anything.
Excuse me, but you can buy one fry and get another free.
Mr. Johnson, we only accept real money.
Monopoly money, bongo bucks, dollar bills, they're all the same. Come on, they all have dollar signs on them.
They may all claim to be a form of payment, but only one of them has value here.
That is so narrow. If everyone was just a little more open to different forms of payment, we would all be a lot richer.
The truth is, you need to use real money or you will lose your home.
There comes a point in life when we have to deal with reality. Believing what you want to believe about God may feel good during your lifetime, but in the end, only truth will matter. Make sure what you believe is true. Another message from Lifeline Productions, located on the web at lifelinepro.com.
Well, if you feel that way about her, why don't you ask her out?
I don't know. I doubt she'd say yes.
How are you going to find out if you don't ask?
Some things we doubt are worth finding out.
Yeah, I heard about the opening and I'd like to interview, but I just don't think I'd get the job.
Bob, you're the best person for that job. You should go for it.
Oh, I doubt they'd even consider me.
But you won't know that unless you interview.
Doubt should motivate us to pursue an answer.
Oh, I doubt it's cancer. I'm sure it's nothing.
Barb, it's a lump. You need to find out for sure.
I doubt they'll find anything.
Are you someone who doubts that God exists?
Frank, do you believe there's a God?
Well, I don't know. Personally, I doubt it.
The question of whether God exists is an important one. Don't base your beliefs on your doubts. Turn your doubts into questions and start asking them. The Bible has a lot to say about God. Be passionate about finding the answer. Another message from Lifeline Productions, located on the web at lifelinepro.com.
Okay, jury members, we need to come to a conclusion on this case.
He's guilty. There were 10 witnesses who saw him.
I agree.
Anyone think he's not guilty?
I think he's not guilty. His brother said he was with him 300 miles away.
I agree.
I thought you agreed he was guilty.
I did. I don't limit myself to only one truth. I believe there are many truths.
Do you believe the testimony of the 10 witnesses?
Yes.
And you believe the brother's testimony?
Yes.
Well, how is it possible for a person to be in a bank and yet 300 miles away at the same time?
I don't know, but we need to respect the beliefs and testimonies of all the witnesses.
In other words, you don't really want to think this through?
Many people believe that all religions lead to heaven, yet Jesus claimed that He is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one comes to the Father except through Him. Since these claims contradict each other, have you examined the evidence and decided which is the truth? Another message from Lifeline Productions, located on the web at lifelinepro.com.
All right. Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever you are. Just like to welcome you. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us tonight or this evening in Jamaica time, here on Zoom, or if you're watching online at Chosen to Glow Ministries. My name is Sarah Buckland, and I will be your host today. I'm also co-hosted by Mr. Leslie Joseph Buckland. We're both from Chosen to Glow Ministries, and today is actually the first of our 9-part series on the theme Christianity. Is it a conspiracy? Is it colonial, or is evidence compelling? So today we will be discussing the topic of truth, worldviews, and God's existence. We do have a great lineup for you tonight, and so I do ask that you stay tuned, because also at the end we will announce our first weekly challenge, which has prizes for you to be won. All right, but before we go any further, we will just begin with a short prayer. Mr. Buckland, you can lead us in prayer.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad that you could join us. Let us go to God in prayer. Father in heaven, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, the one who is, who was, and who is to come, who is neither beginning of days nor end of life. We give you thanks that there is a God, that you have not kept yourself hidden from us, that you have made yourself known to us, and that you have created us so that we may seek you and find you. We pray that people will find their purpose in life and that they will know that the ultimate purpose is to know you and to know your Son, Jesus, whom you sent to give eternal life to those who believe in him. We pray you may bless the speakers that have been scheduled for these series of webinars. And we pray that you'll also be with those that are guests, especially those that have doubts in their hearts. And we pray that some things will be said that will open their eyes, that they will see what they have not seen, to open their ears, that they will hear what they have not understood, so that they may come to you. In Jesus' name, amen and amen.
All right. So, all right, just as an introduction, we know in our world today, it is very fashionable to speak of your truth and mine. In universities, for example, we often are taught about postmodernism and how absolutism is destructive and bigoted. But is this sentiment absolutely true? This evening, we will discuss the first foundation that every human being will have to grapple with. We ask, what is truth? Does truth exist? And even more fundamentally, is it reasonable to believe in God? And does it even matter at all? So to help us with these questions, we have here online the esteemed Miss Claire Williams, who is an alumni of Oxford University. We welcome you and thank you for taking the time to be with us here tonight, Miss Williams. I do have a brief bio before I actually introduce you, but yeah. All right. So Claire is actually the founder of Get Real, and it's a Christian apologetics organization which addresses questions about Christianity, particularly from the Black community. She's of Jamaican heritage on her paternal side, and she's living in the UK and has a degree in English literature and language from Oxford University, and also has completed a postgraduate training in theology at Wycliffe Hall. She also has an MA in leadership and is pursuing a second master's in culture, diaspora, and ethnicity at Birkbeck, University of London. She enjoys engaging with questions of culture, truth, identity, and the gospel. So we welcome you, Claire. We look forward to what you have to share with us, the many questions that I know many of you online would have. And before we actually get into our discussion, at any point in the discussion, if you have a question, please type it in the chat so that we can get to it. We will have two openings of question and answer sections. Alonso Paul is also going to be joining us. He's also an alumna of Oxford University. And I'll just read a brief biography of him as well. He was born and raised in Canada, and he became a Christian in 2009 after wrestling with substance abuse and addiction for over a decade. Since his conversion to Christianity, he has been enthusiastic about sharing the hope found in Jesus with everyone he can. Alonso has a bachelor's degree in theology from the University of Oxford and is particularly interested in discussing people's biggest questions about life and God. He has extensive experience speaking at prison ministries, church, parliament, universities, and many other venues around the world. So as I was saying, I know that we're all bursting with questions here. So we will have two openings of question and answers, and to make the time efficient, as soon as you have questions, feel free to type it in the chat. And in our first question and answer segment, we start to get to your questions. So without further ado, Ms. Claire, the floor is actually yours. I do have some questions to ask you, but you can start saying your thoughts on the topic. Yes.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. It's just gone midnight here in the UK. Thank you so much for joining this session this evening. I just want to say special thanks to Sarah for the invitation and to Mr. Leslie as well for the invitation. It's great to be with you. A good friend of mine and brother in Christ as well as joining, Alonso Paul, so hopefully he'll be able to talk through some questions as well. So yeah, you've heard a little bit about me. Just to add to that, I did grow up in a Christian home. My father was a preacher. He's actually passed away now, sadly, but at some point in my life I had lots of questions, and you may be in that position today. You may have grown up in a Christian home and have questions now, and you may or you may not have grown up in a Christian home and you still have questions. But the point is that God, the Christian worldview states that God can actually bear the weight of our questions. We can bring our questions to him. So I'm just going to share some thoughts about truth, and I think Sarah will be asking me some questions in a moment about what we do, kind of apologetics, and how that links to why we think that Christianity is compelling and that it is true. So I'm just going to share a slide with you really briefly, because I'm sure many of you would have seen this before or heard this argument before, but I just want to go through it with you just briefly, just to convey my point a little bit. So I'm just going to share my screen. Just give me a moment, please. Do let me know, Sarah, if you can actually see this.
Yes, we see.
Okay, I'm just going to go to this one here. Okay, so on this screen here, you can see this picture of an elephant, the elephant in the room, and you can see that there are some people touching the elephant, and that they're saying that this elephant the ear is like a fan, or the tail is like a rope, the leg is like a tree. And it's a famous story about 6 blind men and an elephant, and how they're all trying to figure out what an elephant is. They can't actually see the elephant because they're blind, and so they touch parts of it, and then to that person, in their individual kind of experience of what this elephant is like, they say that, oh, the trunk, the elephant is a snake, or the elephant is a wall. You can see how they're labeling it there. However, this kind of argument is used to suggest that actually, when we look at the world, and we look at different worldviews, and we look at different religions, and we look at different belief systems that aren't necessarily religious, like so secular humanism, atheism, agnosticism, that listen, we're all just trying to find our way. We're all just, in one sense, trying to find ultimate reality. It's not necessarily called God or the God of the Bible. We're all just trying to find our way. We're all like these 6 blind men trying to find our way. And we've all got a little bit of this truth. And so there's a poem by a poet called John Godfrey Sachs, and he kind of summarizes this story. And in the final verse of his poem, he says this. He talks about the 6 blind men of India, and he says, "And so these men of Hindustan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right and all were in the wrong." And this is the last verse of that poem by John Godfrey Sachs. And so the implication here is that, as he says, these 6 blind men are touching a part of the elephant. They're getting some sense of what it is, but they're partly right, but they're actually all in the wrong. And so this is what happens. People say that, you know, all the religions of the world are desperately grappling around in the dark, trying to grab onto what is true, and they're all partly right, but you know, you're all the same, you're all teaching the same thing. But this is quite problematic for 2 reasons. And the first is that sometimes if I say to somebody I'm a Christian, it might be offensive to them, or just anyone being an adherent to any sort of form of religion, it could be said that you're quite arrogant to believe that. How can you know that what you believe is exclusively true? That's completely arrogant. But actually, the person telling the story, the narrator of this story, assumes the almost supreme knowledge, because they're standing back, looking at all the confusion that these 6 blind men are experiencing here, and saying, oh, you guys are trying, but it's all right. And so where does the arrogance lie? Is it in the person who's claiming that, do you know what, I believe the claims of the Bible and I believe Christianity to be true? Or is the arrogance in the person who's standing back and saying, do you know what, you're all trying, but you've all got it a bit wrong and I can see? And so this gives us something to think about. It's not a question of being arrogant, it's about what is real and what is true. And so that leads to the second point of this story, this really popular kind of metaphor, this story here about how we kind of explain away religion, is that there is an elephant in the room. There is a truth to be known. And the Christian claim is that God, most expressly in the person of Jesus, has revealed himself. And he wants to be known. And so we're thinking about what is real and what is true. This is not a question of arrogance or a question of, you know, I know more than you. This is looking at evidence, looking at data, looking at how God has moved and has shown himself in history, and then saying, what do we make of this evidence? To give you another illustration, some people will say, do you know what? All religions are working their way, or all belief systems are working their way to this ultimate reality, whether it's believing in a deity or whether it's believing just in the good of human flourishing. We're all climbing this mountain to God, and all of those paths lead their way to God. They're all leading us up to this God. It doesn't matter if you're what religion or what worldview you belong to. But how do you know that all these paths lead to God? Who would you have to be, and where would you have to be to know that all these paths lead to God? Well, you'd have to be standing on top of the mountain. You'd have to be God, no? So this is again leading back to this idea of the very, very well-meaning and kind of linking to the idea of tolerance, of trying to be accepting of all belief systems. I think it comes from an inherently good place, but actually logically it falls apart. And so we're asking the question today, what is real and what is true? And so as we've seen with the illustration of this poem here, as I've again suggested with this idea of the mountain and every path leading up to the top, there is such a thing as truth. And we need to decide where we land. So what we're going to be doing today is exploring, after some questions from Sarah, we're going to explore some of the evidences that point to the existence of God. And wherever you are today, I don't know whether you're skeptical, whether you've had doubts, whether you've been through a traumatic phase in your faith, no matter where you are, we're hoping and inviting you along to consider some of what we're saying today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the moment. And if Sarah, you want to go through some of those questions, and then we'll move on to the next part.
Right. Sure, definitely. From what you mentioned, the first question that really came to my mind is, why can't we be comfortable with where we are at? Why is there something inherently important for the human being for us to actually find what is truth? What is the importance for us to, in our existence or well-being or what value does it really have?
To know what is true.
To know what is truth.
Right. It's very interesting, actually, because I don't know if this happened in Jamaica, but in the UK, and maybe Alonso might want to check in here about what happened in Canada, when the pandemic really hit and people were, asked to lock down and marginalized and separated, not marginalized, sorry, separated and on their own, social distancing. During that time, there were so many searches on Google and the internet, and people asking much, much deeper questions. Suddenly, we had a taste of our own mortality in the face of this pandemic. What is my purpose? Why am I here? What happens after I die? Okay, and so sometimes when we are confronted with our own mortality, when we're confronted with situations that take us away from sort of the anesthetizing busyness of life, we actually think, well, what is this all about? What is this all about? And so I believe that because Genesis 1 states that we are made in the image of God, there is a longing in us that desires ultimate truth, ultimate grounding, ultimate reality. And people experience that and kind of meet that need in various ways. But actually, what is our purpose? What is our grounding? And that comes, the answer to that for me as a Christian comes in when we're looking at the claims of Christianity and most expressly the person of Jesus. I don't know if Zoe, you wanted to jump in here at all.
Yeah, Claire, you're so smart. Such a wonderful answer. Sarah, everyone, such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for inviting this Canadian to the talk. I would just want to chime in and say on a more existentially relevant note. So by that, I mean like relevant to the daily life, like getting down to the nitty gritty grassroots. And Claire was definitely covering that as well, but maybe just to underscore it is when I'm thinking about truth and why it is significant to pursue it. I think as I reflect, for my own life, I'm convinced that I just don't want to live a lie. That this can boil down to my relationships, my romantic life with my wife, with my education, with so many areas. The truth question is so relevant. And I think as I get older, I just see how more relevant and significant it actually is, not only to enormous questions like COVID and the world and politics and so on, but even to the daily life. So that's a little bit, but you can feel free to push back all you want, and we can have a discussion.
Definitely, we're all open to discussions, but I just wanted to get in a question. There was a term that you mentioned before called worldviews. I'm not sure how many of us are really familiar with what are worldviews, and especially as both of you are Christians, and with many of us who are here are not Christians. In practical terms, does it really play out? What are worldviews, and how do our worldviews play out in practical terms in how we relate to each other, and does it really matter?
Yeah, I can.
How can we? Yeah,
I can start this off and give Claire a second to gather her thoughts. A worldview is essentially the lens in which you're going to view the world and interpret all of the data that you will be receiving. And this is going to have an impact or implications on every area of life, whether you're looking at the environment or politics or your own identity and worth and the identity and worth of other folks. This will play a huge role because it's going to fuel and resource the responses that you would have to any particular big question, as well as it's going to help you sort through that data and what does that data mean. So that's the beginning of an answer. Such a good question.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think worldview, sometimes when we think about religious adherents, so people who Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, whatever, we think that only religious people have a worldview and that the way that they see the world is colored by their religious persuasion. But actually in the UK, and this is something that's come out in our education system recently, which I think is actually a good thing. This began in 2018, where they want to change the way that RE is taught, so religious education is taught in schools, to change it from RE to religion and worldviews. And so what will happen is the hard questions of life, the deepest questions of life, like what is my purpose? Why am I here? Why do we have morality? Why do we have ethics? What is the utility of scientific explanation? Those big questions that are answered oftentimes in sort of people's religious persuasion, actually those questions will now be pointed to and asked of other worldviews such as agnosticism, secular humanism, atheism. And so the UK changing its education system to say religion and worldviews is actually showing that every single person, whether you're religious or not, you have a worldview. You have a way of seeing the world. You have presuppositions and assumptions about how the world works. And that comes out in your daily life choices, that comes out in who you might settle down and settle down with in relationship, that comes out in the way you might raise your children. Everybody has a worldview. It's like this invisible pair of glasses we put on in the morning and through which we see the world. So as a Christian, I have a Christian worldview and I need to own that. I need to own the fact that when someone asks me a question about anything, it's going to be tinted through this lens. But equally, the person who is not religiously affiliated also has a worldview, which is that perhaps God doesn't exist and we don't need a God, we don't need to defer to a deity for the good of human flourishing. Everybody has a worldview, a way of seeing the world.
Okay, so my follow-up question would really be, because we most likely do have some atheists on the call or people who are searching. I wanted to really get into more details as to is there any bridge or commonality that we as Christians have with atheists in how we view what is real, or how we can discern what is reality from not. So for example, in my speaking with some atheists, they will appeal to our senses, for example, our physical senses, empiricism, materialism, thinking that the only thing that is real are things that you can observe, you can touch, you can feel, you can see. We do accept that what you sense as a Christian is what makes up at least part of our reality. But the confinement of materialism versus those who believe further in truth that is beyond what human beings can see. Are there any inconsistencies or, what, for example, I have thought of is, if your senses are only a product of natural chance, for example, there's no supernatural intervention, why should I trust that my senses are working to actually show me what's true? And so I just wanted kind of that type of looking at the pros and cons of the way that we view the world, how consistent it is, how coherent it is. So if we can just have a little conversation, and then maybe in 5 minutes, we open the floor to just answer some of the questions, because someone had their hand up for a while.
Yeah. I can start off there, Sarah. Again, brilliant questions. What you were describing at the end there is a popular argument within philosophy, specifically the philosophy of religion, called the evolutionary argument against naturalism, which posits that it's troubling and unlikely that we could trust things like our cognitive systems, our brain, to seek after truth necessarily if naturalism is true. And the reason why they would articulate that sort of argument, not to prove God's existence, but just to challenge naturalism, is that your brain, instead of being adapted and developed for truth and seeking truth, it would have more likely been developed to survive. And that would be a very evolutionary interpretation of the human history. And that's, I think, a very convincing argument. And people like C.S. Lewis picked up this, and namely, I think one of the more popular people to write about this is a gentleman named Alvin Plantinga. I think he's passed away now. I could be wrong. He could just be retired. But he's worth checking out, both of those authors. Now, you were asking initially, what are some of the areas or commonalities that theists, people that believe in God, and atheists may have? And I think there are actually quite a few. And this is me trying to be as charitable, I think, as possible, because I have conversations with my friends that don't believe in God all of the time. I go to a university that doesn't necessarily espouse Christianity, and we have conversations. And I think one of the sometimes unfortunate realities of when people who believe in God, this isn't just particularly to Christians, that there is this, there can be sometimes a view that you think the other person's view is just silly and ridiculous. And I know that I've had those moments before in my life, but the more conversations I've had, the more sense I actually see there's reasons why people believe what they believe, and not everybody is completely irrational. There's actually some good reasons. So I think you can find some common ground and then start building bridges and having really meaningful conversations. That's what Claire and I are really excited about. But some of those commonalities might be things such as the value of matter, for instance, the physical matter. For the materialist or naturalist, that is going to be ultimate. If there is no afterlife, then necessarily that's going to be ultimate. And whether you take a pessimistic or optimistic postmodern view of naturalistic human history and future, matter is all that you've got to work with. So there's going to be a high value to that. I think for the Christian side, as trying to find some commonality, there is likewise a high value and esteem placed on things like matter, like the environment, like other people, and so on. And the reason for that fundamentally is at first we were, according to the biblical story, given stewardship over physical matter, and that we are to care for these things because they are created by God, which means that they are endowed with intrinsic value. That means other people, to the environment, and so on. C.S. Lewis, an author from Oxford as well, sorry, you're going to get bombarded by all these Oxford folks. So he once wrote that, matter matters to God because he invented it. So he thinks, at least, it's a good idea. So those are some of the common grounds. There's far more that we could discuss, but I want to invite Claire to contribute.
Yeah, I think one thing, thank you so much for that, Zoe, that's really helpful, that I found quite compelling, and this is just coming off the back of some study I've done at university again, which is the shift away from positivism within sort of academia to seeing that there is more to the human experience than anything that can just be scientifically proven. And I think, so if you look at the social sciences, for instance, if you look at the ways that people would sort of look at different cultures through ethnographic studies, it used to be this idea in the research, in the scholarship, that if I went to study a certain culture, I'm this objective observer, and I have no sort of baggage. I'm just looking and reporting completely neutrally. When actually this shift, it kind of came about through postmodernism against positivism, which says that the only things that can be verified or seen to be true have to be scientifically proven, shifted away from that and said, actually, no, we are subjects, we have subjectivities, we experience life, and we have ways of narrating the world that are more robust than just kind of facts and numbers and statistical data. And so that has nothing to do with Christianity, but I just found it very interesting that the Christian would also share the fact that, yes, we are more than just our physical selves. There is something more to us in our life experience. Now, the Christian would land and say that this comes from, as Zoe was saying, being made in the image of God, whereas in the social sciences, it's all about more or less about subjectivities and how we view ourselves in the world. But I think the shift away from positivism within academia is actually a good example of a similarity between Christianity and more atheistic positions.
Okay, very, very interesting conversation. I'm going to just pause at this time. First half an hour has expired. We do have a comment in the chat, and I believe someone's hand was also up. Dala says, truth in this postmodern world is sadly what I think, what you think, how I feel, how you feel. Truth is immutable. What we see now is too much subjectivity. No objective standpoint, unfortunately, for many persons. That's a very interesting comment, and I think it ties into what you just mentioned. As being in research myself, I've studied the philosophies, and the irony of what postmodernism posits is that it actually, to have the position that everything is relative is an actually absolute statement. And those are some of the inconsistencies that I wanted us to really highlight here today, because which worldview, as we compare the commonalities, what I wanted to have is like a bridge of what we can agree on, and then what we can challenge based how we can go forward with reasoning on our agreements, and then looking at, are you borrowing from the Christian worldview without knowing it? Which worldview actually are you actually operating on to live successfully in life? So that is a very good comment, Dala. Marcel, I think I saw a hand from you. If you're still online, you can open your mic. And if anyone else has a question at this point, we will just pause and hear. Please don't be shy. Yeah. So. Yes, Marcel.
Good evening, everyone, or whatever time frame it is, or across the world, wherever you may be joining on. But first, I'd like to thank the persons, Claire Williams, and I think that's Zoe. I hope I'm not pronouncing it, but thank you for coming on. My first question is that how is it that people can say all religions are true, or all religions lead you to the same path? And looking at the major world religions, they say contradictory things. For example, in Buddhism, they don't have a concept of heaven and hell. I mean, then how how can you all say they lead you to the same place if they're all saying something different and they all claim to be absolutely true and everything else to be false? How does that tie in? That's a big inconsistency I see with just in that alone.
Thank you, Marcel. That's a very good question. So anyone who wants to respond?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think that's right. It's an astute observation, Marcel. And can I just say, I'm enjoying just listening to the questioners as well as Sarah, because I'm enjoying listening to the accents. My background, my dad's from Berbice, Guyana. And so I'm just missing, there's not too many Caribbean people out here in BC where I'm at. It's the west coast of Canada. There was more so in Toronto on the East Coast, but I moved from there. So I'm enjoying the dialogue is what I'm saying. This is a real treat and delight. So Marcel, I think that's an astute observation that you see this inconsistency within our culture to not esteem the differences within each worldview correctly. And for me, just as an observation for free, I'll give you is it seems to not actually, in my view, respect each of these worldviews as inclusivistic and as pluralistic as we would like to be. It seems to me, my wife, she comes from a Muslim family. She's a convert to Christianity. It would be disrespectful if I said that what her family believes is the same thing as some of my Hindu cousins or some of my Buddhist friends. And so I think that that's right. I think a lot of times what I observe, and this is again just I have classmates that are of other worldviews that I really respect and have interesting conversations with, is I don't think a lot of folks think their worldview through all of the way. And I think there's also a lot of parroting. Now, I imagine you were looking for a deeper answer, but this is just commonly what I come across, whether it's with Islam, for instance. My ancestors were Muslim. You know, we've basically conflated the Islamic idea of paradise, even though there's multiple paradises, and the Christian idea of heaven. We've conflated it into one sort of similar idea. Yeah, what the heck is the difference? And there's world of a difference. There's a world of a difference, not only with heaven, but with the understanding of God. But again, I'm not going to get off in that tangent because that's a really interesting conversation as well that I have with all of my Muslim family and friends. But the fact of the matter is, I think that there's a lack of depth when it comes to thinking through the doctrines and beliefs of a particular worldview that many people adhere to. There's a superficial understanding. And likewise, I see a lot of parroting that comes from a heart of, I want to be inclusive, which Claire rightly said, I think is a good thing. I think it's intrinsically, it's a good thing that we don't bully each other, that we are actually working towards like coming together, even though I don't think it's true that each worldview is equally true. I think the heart of, hey, I want to come together and have a conversation is a good thing that I want to affirm. But there are significant differences, which you had already enumerated, Marcel. So I hope that helps. Claire, is there anything you want to?
No, I think you covered it. You kind of said what I would say anyway. So thank you, Marcel, for your point.
Yes, so there is another hand. Dala has his hand up again, so you can unmute yourself now and have your comment.
Good day to everyone, wherever you are. I would just like to thank the panel and for putting this on. I think this is excellent. I'd like to stretch the discussion and bring it closer to where the host was going in terms of understanding the commonalities that exist across these various worldviews. As was stated earlier, you know, a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, an atheist, an agnostic, they have their own faiths. They are convicted, they have their trust, they have certain beliefs. And I think where those things come from has to do with what is heard, what is learned, and what is taught. And so I think there's a space for that. But in addressing or going back to the discussion about bridging, coming to this crossroads where, you know, we can agree on certain things. I think one of the things that fits into this discussion is the notion, the idea, the concept of ultimate authority. In the postmodern world, it's almost as though, I'm entitled, Zoe is entitled to his own authority. Claire the same, Sarah the same. But I think for everyone, certainly mankind, this idea of ultimate authority, I think we all can accept. There is this striving that man has, this innate desire to reach out to that which is beyond himself. I think is a start. For some, while they might not be able to grasp the concept of something outside of themselves, I think if you look throughout all the worldviews, all the world religions, that's a common theme. That's a common thread that we see soon. This idea that there is, in fact, ultimate authority. You may call it Brahma, I may call it Allah, I may call it God, you may call it whatever. But this idea that there's ultimate authority, I think, is a starting point. The question and the challenge, of course, becomes, how does one identify this ultimate authority? Does this ultimate authority in the first place reveals himself, herself, themselves, whatever you want to call it at this juncture? I just wanted to input that.
Thank you, Dalo. Can you have a quick response? And then I also have questions of my own to segue into the next segment. So
I think just in terms of a quick response, I think that what you were saying, Della, was actually quite pertinent. And I think what we're trying to do over this series is actually look at the evidence that is out there, and then, as you said, how do you pinpoint what is this ultimate reality? So yeah, I think that's what we're trying to achieve here, and that's the big conundrum, isn't it? When we're presented with many evidences or many kind of like flickers of light, possibly pointing to who or what is the ultimate reality, we need to decide at the end of the day. So I think what you're saying is absolutely right, and that's what we're hoping. And I know that's been Sarah's heart for this series, to present the case for Christianity and then allow people to make their decision.
Yes, I'd like to jump in right here. Thanks to everyone who is contributing to the discussion on worldviews. I'm enjoying the discussion. I think I need to look at another angle and not stray away from what you have brought. And that is the question, yes, we all have worldviews, but how may I test any worldview to know if it is dealing with ultimate reality? What is real? Let me give you an illustration. In Jamaican history, there was a man named Alexander Bedford who lived in the 19th century. And one of his teachings to his congregation was that if he climbed to the top of his church building in Augustown and he jumped off, he believed he could flap his hands and fly. And he tried it out. He really believed. And he went up to the top of his building and he jumped off and he started to flap his hands, but he went straight down to the ground and had to be taken to hospital. You see, I may believe strongly that something is true, but is it really true? How do I know if it is really true? Let me give you one more example and I will hand it back over to the others. There is an atheist who would ask the question, why are you inflicting harm on children in Sunday school by teaching them that there is a God? Don't you know that that is an evil thing to do? Well, that worldview says there is no God. And so to the atheists, it seemed cruel to teach children that there is a God that you are obligated to follow for the rest of your life. But that raises the question, how do I know what is good or what is evil? If there is no God, how can there be absolute evil? What standard is he using to judge me or anyone else? You see, if there is no God, there can be no absolute universal standard. Each person will have to make their standard. So one of the issues then is, how do I test my worldview or other people's worldviews for consistency, for coherency? Because what I've told you a while ago is simply not consistent with the atheistic worldview to impose a personal moral standard on someone who believes in God and says, because you're breaking my personal moral standard, you're doing something evil.
Thanks for that. I invite both the guests or anyone here, especially if you're an atheist and you have that worldview that was described. If you have a challenge for us, we welcome you also to join in the conversation as well. So if you have a ready answer, because that is a very good direction to bring the conversation, to segue into how can I know, is it reasonable, especially as a person who has studied science, for example, on a personal level, is it really reasonable to believe that God exists? Because that's the second half of our conversation here tonight. So what say us now?
Yes, how do we test our worldviews?
Yeah, here, I'm reading a new book. It's called Telling a Better Story. And it's by a gentleman, Joshua D. Chatraw. And it is worth picking up. He's a professor. I forget which university in the States he's a professor at, but I can't recommend it enough. And essentially, he brings up some contemporary issues about sharing one's worldview, defending or apologetics for one's worldview, and just entering into the postmodern mind in order to articulate, defend, and share one's worldview. So classically in apologetics, I think if you were a good apologist, like Claire, for instance, oftentimes you would create a case, and Dr. Joshua Chatraw would call this the block building, apologetic block building. And in academic terms, this would be a cumulative case. Like you would, like a detective would with a crime scene. You don't go and make a decision or a conclusion based on one piece of evidence. It's cumulative. You collect all the data. You talk to eyewitnesses. You examine DNA, and so on and so forth, and then you present your case for it. And I think that that's a really reasonable and rational approach if you're wired that way, or if you're interested in pursuing those sorts of questions. But it's not the only way. And I think that that's really necessary. Don't get me wrong. I'm studying analytic theology in university right now. So I'm with you if you want to nerd out on rationality, evidence, reason, argumentation, deductive reasoning, and so on and so forth. But another way also is through story. In our culture has a plurality of narratives or stories that you will constantly be hearing, whether that's a utopian future story or narrative, whether it's a pessimistic, absurd, life is meaningless, there is no God, there is no afterlife sort of narrative, or a consumerism. You would only be happy if you had this, or a romantic narrative. You would just be happy if you had found love, if you can get that kiss that you've so longed for, and those sorts of things. I think one way that is a viable contribution to authenticating your worldview and demonstrating its veracity, its truthfulness, is to know, first of all, the Christian story, the gospel story, and show how it not only meets these needs, let's say with some sort of love story that culture is pushing on us, it can not only meet those things, but is the fulfillment of that and offers you a better, more compelling, more robust, more complex story than you're currently living by. And so I would recommend that to you. It is fascinating to think about some authors like Alistair McGrath from Oxford University, again, another Oxford professor. You can pick up his recent book called Narrative Apologetics. And that's going to be an extraordinarily helpful tool for you if you want to think about apologetics and your worldview in terms of story.
Hey, very interesting perspective. All right, I'm gonna just take Miss Candice Charlton. She has her hand up, and then we will go deeply into the other part of our discussion tonight. So, Candice.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you again for organizing this, and it has been very nice thus far listening to the discussion and the conversation. Just in terms of the last question that was kind of asked or posed, how do you kind of substantiate your worldview or the principles by which you live? And I think towards the end there, I'm not big on many names or know many people or even many religious terms, surprisingly. I'm a Christian, but I really just don't learn all the terms, like the difference between apologetics and all of those things. I don't. So maybe some of the terms are a little lost on me, but then I think at the end there, Zoe, you kind of picked up on what I think is the basis of substantiating your worldview. And as a Christian, everything that I do is bounced off the word of God. It's not just necessarily just the New Testament, but the entire word from Genesis to Revelation. Because as I study, as I live, as I experience, when I go in devotions, when I go in reading, I can literally make the link between what I'm experiencing and what is written. And the awesome thing about how it's written is they're all stories, and everybody loves storytelling. The thing that I think people lack when it comes to reading the Bible is they are trying to understand history as a today's story without asking for further meaning. And I say that to say you can't study something with the set knowledge that you have today. You have to understand some of the background of it to be able to make sense of what is being read. And so because many persons don't look further than what is written there, they don't try to seek for the background. Why is it that they told the story this particular way? What was the importance of them mentioning this piece of information? Does it add to how I'm supposed to interpret this or not? That is, I think, something that is missing from how we examine the Christian faith and examine the Bible and its teaching. And so you have to always look back to what is there, but then you have to know the means by which you understand what is written there. So that's what I had to say on that.
Thanks so much, Candice. Appreciate your input. Yes. I don't know if you have any comments on it. I kind of think this was more of a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, kind of linked to what Zoe was saying about truth and relevance. So in that book, I definitely recommend it, Narrative Apologetics by Alistair McGrath. So I do think there is a piece to be had in our faith, and we're trying to substantiate what it is that we believe. To have the rational arguments, is my belief consistent? Does it correspond to reality? Is it coherent? So all those kind of like standards for what is true, but then also something can be true and just not relevant. All right. So for instance, we'll see particularly across Europe, I don't know what the situation is like in Jamaica, maybe someone can tell me, but we know that a lot of Gen Z are really concerned about climate change. And I'm not sure where people land politically, where you are with that argument, but a lot of teens and Gen Z in the West are really, feel strongly about climate change, and we have to do something about it. But then even if that data is shown to be true or not, if it's shown to be true, you can have someone be like, well, yeah, so the world might, that climate change might be on the rise, but that's not relevant to my life. I'm living my life now. Okay, so truth and relevance need to go hand in hand. And there's a beautiful quote, which I can't remember, by Alistair McGrath from that book, where he talks about that the veracity of something is one thing, but then if it's relevant or not to someone's life, is going to be a wholly different thing. So truth and relevant. And that's why we kind of bring our whole person to God. We're not just here to bring our minds, but our hearts also. And sometimes maybe, well, we're going to get into this. I don't want to preempt my presentation, but yes, I just want to say that truth and relevance need to go together. It can be true all we like from morning till night, but unless it's relevant and it changes the trajectory of my life and my lived experience, if it's not livable, why would I care?
Interesting. All right, I think that the final part of our discussion should be discussing a little bit about the relevance of our worldviews then, the implications, for example, of materialism versus believing in God, like on how we relate to each other, on how you know, the quality of life, and, you know, what if we're wrong, what if the Christian is wrong versus what if the atheist is wrong, which will actually have more implications. So we can maybe fit in a little bit of that discussion near the end. I think we should segue now into our discussion about God, right? So I think you had a presentation there.
Yes, I do. I will begin to share that. So welcome to anyone who's just joining as well. Do get stuck in with this discussion. So I'm just going to share a few thoughts with you. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So we're asking a big question today. Does God exist? A very loaded question. And we've already started to kind of explore that in our discussion so far. And I think one of the things that I've come across in my own sort of doubts, maybe that I've had in my own faith, I told you that I was raised in a Christian home, preacher for a father, you know, in church a lot, but then kind of going to university, seeing different kinds of knowledge and hearing different kinds of arguments. Sometimes when we want to know whether the question, does God exist, yes or no, just give me the hard facts. You know, if you can't prove to me with, you know, hard facts in front of my face, in front of my eyes, something for me to touch, then just go home. But actually, when we think about the question, does God exist, it's a lot more complex than this, and it requires a little bit more thinking. So I just want to go through some ideas in brief, because I know the time is going. So I don't know if you've seen memes like this on social media, but I see quite a few of these kind of memes where people who are religious, or just say Christians, they just have blind faith. They're like sheep. They just listen to what their pastor says. They just listen to the Bible. They don't really think for themselves. They don't have any critical engagement. And this is kind of how sometimes belief in God is caricatured. What about memes like this? So what you see here is someone having a book. I assume is like a Christian preacher at the top there saying, I have a book. I assume these are Muslims here saying, I have a book too. And then you've got two scientists, that's Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you've got Bill Nye, the science guy, an American engineer saying, well, these people need more books. And so the message here, obviously, the people in this image didn't ask to be put into this meme that this is someone else's work. But the message here is that people who are religious, people who adhere to Christianity or any other religion, are not rational thinkers. They don't think for themselves, and they actually need science. Science must lead the way. And so this is how a lot of the time Christianity can be caricatured, and sometimes the Christian can be slightly responsible for this as well. We also need to engage and have a thinking faith, and that's why I really enjoy apologetics. Really love the fact that Sarah has opened up the conversation for us tonight. So we don't want to just be kind of blindly going forward. We want to be thinking through our faith. And so actually we have a scriptural precedent for that, and it's in St. Mark 12, 30 to 31. Jesus is asked, what is the greatest commandment of all? And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all of your mind and with all of your strength. And then out of loving God comes the love for one's neighbor. And so I just want to encourage anyone here who's maybe having doubts or any kind of feelings of skepticism, thinking, you know, I go to church maybe on a Sunday and I have this emotional experience. Does it actually bear true in reality? Is it consistent? Is it real? Well, actually, God calls us to an invitation in relation with him to love him with our heart and also with our mind, to have a thinking and reasoning faith. I see a hand has gone up there. Do you want to take that question or comment?
I'd appreciate it if I could interject, because Claire, I think you're moving too fast. I think,
Okay.
no, I mean that as a compliment. I mean, you made a point that I think we probably just need to pause and let it soak in. For a very, very long time, I have concluded that people believe what they believe because other people believe what they believe. People believe what they believe because other people believe what they believe. And to your point, no one thinks for themselves. No one asks questions. And so I suspect that persons who are a part of this forum are persons who want to know truth, are seeking to have that question answered. And I'm saying that that's the first step. I think your point needs to be underscored some more. The idea that I think it is okay to ask questions, even as a Christian. It is okay to question, because that kind of attitude, that kind of mentality should lead you to want to be genuine about your efforts in studying. Yeah, whether it's, I'm not telling everybody to go and become a Greek scholar and a Hebrew scholar, but I'm saying the idea that we probably need to consider thinking and not just going with everything in the wind goes back to something that I said earlier. We are convicted, we believe what we believe because we hear, because that has been taught to us. Have we ourselves been honest with ourselves and done our own investigation?
Thank you so much for that, Dallin. I think absolutely we can have questions, and as I said at the start, God can bear the weight of our questions. When you look at actually Jesus's ministry in scripture, a lot of what he does is ask people questions. In fact, I think there's a book called Jesus is the Question, rather than Jesus is the answer. It looks at how many questions Jesus actually asked people. So God is a God who can bear the weight of our questions, and really want to encourage people, particularly if you're on the threshold of faith and doubt here, or the threshold of leaving your faith, that this is about thinking and reasoned faith that God has actually called us to himself. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on because I'm aware of the time, and I want to leave some time at the end for more conversation and more discussion. So when we're thinking about what the question, does God exist? We're looking at evidence, okay? We're not looking at, a performance, tell me 1, 2, 3, bish bash bosh, God exists or not. We're looking at how he has revealed himself, yes, in the person of Jesus, but through other means. And a bit like that jigsaw puzzle, we're putting the pieces together. As Alonso said, they were making a cumulative case for Christianity. We've got our torches out, we're looking at the evidence, we're magnifying, we're zooming in, and then building a picture for, does God exist? And so one of the things I really learned and was really helpful to me in my journey of questioning and also training in apologetics is actually to change the way I phrase things. So rather than saying this proves 100% unequivocally that God exists, giving people the room to say, well, when we look at this evidence, what best explains it? Or what is this consistent with? What does it point to? And does it warrant further investigation? And rather saying, I'm going to give you the facts that God exists, I'm going to give you arguments. So things that you can consider to then make your decision whether you believe the claims of Christianity. And so as we're making our cumulative case, what we're doing is looking at evidence from science, scientific inquiry. We're looking at evidence from philosophy, our ethics, our morality, the way we treat one another, looking at, again, at our personal experience. And that's something that Zoe was talking about when we talked about truth and relevance, and also history. So looking at a range of data and then saying, when we put these pieces together, is it creating this cumulative case for God? And then when we start to have conversations about God, do we then arrive at conversations about Jesus? So that's what we're doing. So wherever your position is today, I really want to invite you, particularly today and over the rest of this series, to look at the data and then make your decision, to have a thinking faith, not to feel, as Dalla was pointing out, that we can't think, that we can't ask questions, that we can't scrutinize what it is that we're committing ourselves to. And so I found this quote by Blaise Pascal really helpful. And he says, there is enough light for those who only desire to see, and enough obscurity for those who have a contrary disposition. And it's kind of what he's implying here is that God's revelation of himself, if indeed he does exist, has been done in such a way that if we don't want to know him, then we don't have to. We can ignore that. But there's also enough evidence, enough flickers of a flame pointing to his existence for us to follow and ultimately become in a relationship with him. So I found this really quite helpful here. So just very briefly to touch upon this, and I know there's a session devoted to science and faith coming up, but this is just going to kind of underpin some of the arguments that we're going to look at very briefly, because I realize that time is going, is that unfortunately in our postmodern age, there has this conflict between science and faith continues to exist. This myth that if you are a religious adherent, then you cannot possibly believe in scientific inquiry. And actually, within the academy, and someone like, say, Alison McGrath, he's got a great book called The Fine-Tuned Universe. He's a fantastic scientist and Christian. Will say that in the academy, this has actually been quashed. People don't actually think that this conflict exists. But in popular culture, it's very much alive and well. So that if you are interested in the sciences, then you have to choose between your faith and science. And it's just not true. And a colleague of a good friend of mine has written a book, Alonso knows him very well as well, and he talks about science versus scientism. And science is a beautiful discipline. We can observe the world. It can tell us great things. It can give us knowledge. It's a great discipline. And there are many minds who have contributed to the discipline of science. But then you have scientism, which is actually more of a philosophical leaning, and the idea that only science has the answers. And if the questions cannot be answered by science, then perhaps those questions aren't even worth answering. And that is a very reductive way of looking at the world. Because say, for instance, again, I'm not sure what the picture was like in Jamaica, but in the UK, when we had to lock down, and the politicians would often say, we're following the science. So we had to lock down, we had to social distance, we had to mask up, we had to put on hand sanitizer, all the things that you would do because of what the science is saying is the best thing to do. Those, when people had to social distance and they longed to be in community, they wanted to be in relation, they wanted to physically touch their loved ones, not to have a Zoom conversation. Science doesn't give an answer to those desires and those longings and those questions. So what we see is that there are some questions, there are some things about the human experience that lie outside the remit of science. But scientism would have us believe that only science has the answer. And what it's taken is a beautiful discipline which makes a lot of sense and works because I believe of the nature and character of God and his actual mind, and has distorted it to say that actually this is the ultimate truth. And so what Simon Edwards says in his great book, which I do recommend to you, it's called The Sanity of Belief, provocatively titled there, The Sanity of Belief, Why Faith Makes Sense. He says the real conflict is between two competing belief systems: belief in God, theism, and belief that there is no God, atheism. This is what I think is really important. Science itself is actually neutral. Even if scientists were to figure out one day how all the different parts of the material universe work, science would neither have proved nor disproved the design of God behind it all. And we get the sense of the truth of this statement because you have Christians who are scientists and you have atheists who are scientists. They're both working from the same data, which we're going to explore briefly when we look at one of the arguments for God's existence. But then it's how that's interpreted and what we believe it points to. And this is what we're going to be looking at today, what we're inviting you to do, whether you're on, if you have questions about faith, look at the data and then make your decision. That's the invitation that we're offering to you today and through this series. So I guess one of the best places to start is from the beginning and looking at the universe, this beautiful world in which we live, full of beauty and also brokenness. But how do we make sense of that? And so the universe, again, Simon Edwards in this great book, The Sanity of Belief, he says that there have been kind of three broad ways of understanding how the universe began or how it came into existence. And one is that the argument that it always existed. We're going to just go through that briefly. The second is the argument that it was self-generated. And the third is that it was created by God. Okay, so we know that we live in this universe, and then now we have to try and decide where the evidence is pointing to a universe that always existed, one that was self-generated, one that was created by God. When we look at the argument that the universe always existed, it was espoused, I would say most prolifically by Sir Fred Hoyle, an amazing scientist, brilliant, absolutely brilliant mind, not a Christian, not a theist in any form. And he actually espoused the idea of a steady state universe. And he actually rejected on radio the idea that the universe actually began at a single moment in time. So he was saying that the universe always existed, and it was espoused by Sir Fred Hoyle. However, due to different scientific discoveries like background microwave radiation and I think it's red shifts as well. I can't remember off the top of my head because I'm very tired at this point in time. But through different scientific discoveries, this idea that the universe always existed was actually refuted. Was actually the consensus shifted to say no, actually, the universe did begin at a specific moment in time. And so this idea has kind of lost its weight in the scientific community. So we can put this one to one side. But then what about the argument that the universe is self-generated? And one person to espouse this is again the great mind, Stephen Hawking. In his book, The Brief History of Time, he talks about quantum cosmology, and he kind of talks about how the laws of physics enabled the universe to become created, to generate itself. But then when we think about what a law is actually descriptive of activity that has happened or taken place. It's not, doesn't have potential, it doesn't create things. So this idea that the universe, the laws of physics created the universe or made the universe self-generate, again, it doesn't quite hold enough sway. So then how did the universe come about? Because what this self-generated argument does is say, actually, do you know what? The universe didn't always exist. It began as a finite point in time. What are we supposed to make of it? And so the explanation, and I think this is where quite a few scientists would land, is that quantum cosmology is the explanation for this. But then we have the idea that the universe was created by God. And then, so we're thinking about what makes the most sense of the evidence that the universe always existed, that the universe self-generated through the laws of physics, which are descriptive rather than kind of potential creative in what they do, or the universe was created by God. And so this is a great quote from Dr. William Lane Craig, and do check out this video if you get the chance. It's the unbelievable video, and it's he's in a discussion talking about, does God explain the mathematical realm? And here he says this: design and order in the universe points to a mind. He hasn't said it's God, he hasn't said it's the God of the Bible, he hasn't said it's Jesus. He's saying that design and order in our universe points to a mind, which has to be, here's the quote, uncaused, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful, and to cause the mathematical realm, it would have to be omniscient. We're winding up with a very rich theological ultimate, which is kind of shorthand for pointing to the idea of God as the ultimate reality. And so if we look at some of the descriptions that he says about this mind, that the mind would have to be uncaused, well, the argument for the beginning of the universe as created by God is this: that we know that whatever begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist. We know these two premises are true, therefore the universe has a cause. And so for the universe to have a cause, the thing that caused it or enabled it to begin would have to be uncaused, would have to be self-sufficient in and of itself. It would have to be timeless, it would have to be spaceless, immaterial, enormously powerful. And so does this point to, and if you look at the way that William Lane Craig kind of phrases his statement here, does it point to Jesus of Nazareth? At this point, no, it doesn't. But what we're doing, as I've said at the start, is we're building a case, a cumulative case for the existence of God. And then we're going to be drilling down through the sessions that follow on the person of Jesus and other evidences that point to the God of the Bible. I wanted to play a video now just to explain this in a little bit more detail. I'm going to stop sharing for the moment. So I wonder if Sarah, you're able to share the video, please, the first one. Thank you.
Does God exist? Or is the material universe all that is, or ever was, or ever will be? One approach to answering this question is the cosmological argument. It goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore, the universe has a cause. Is the first premise true? Let's consider. Believing that something can pop into existence without a cause is more of a stretch than believing in magic. At least with magic, you've got a hat and a magician. If something can come into being from nothing, then why don't we see this happening all the time? No, everyday experience and scientific evidence confirm our first premise. If something begins to exist, it must have a cause. But what about our second premise? Did the universe begin, or has it always existed? Atheists have typically said that the universe has been here forever. The universe is just there, and that's all. First, let's consider the second law of thermodynamics. It tells us the universe is slowly running out of usable energy, and that's the point. If the universe had been here forever, it would have run out of usable energy by now. The second law points us to a universe that has a definite beginning. This is further confirmed by a series of remarkable scientific discoveries. In 1915, Albert Einstein presented his general theory of relativity. This allowed us, for the first time, to talk meaningfully about the past history of the universe. Next, Alexander Friedmann and George Lemaitre, each working with Einstein's equations, predicted that the universe is expanding. Then in 1929, Edwin Hubble measured the red shift in light from distant galaxies. This empirical evidence confirmed not only that the universe is expanding, but that it sprang into being from a single point in the finite past. It was a monumental discovery, almost beyond comprehension. However, not everyone is fond of a finite universe, so it wasn't long before alternative models popped into existence. But one by one, these models failed to stand the test of time. More recently, three leading cosmologists, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin, prove that any universe which has on average been expanding throughout its history cannot be eternal in the past, but must have an absolute beginning. This even applies to the multiverse, if there is such a thing. This means that scientists can no longer hide behind a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Any adequate model must have a beginning, just like the standard model. It's quite plausible then that both premises of the argument are true. This means that the conclusion is also true. The universe has a cause. And since the universe can't cause itself, its cause must be beyond the space-time universe. It must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, uncaused, and unimaginably powerful, much like God. The cosmological argument shows that, in fact, it is quite reasonable to believe that God does exist.
Okay, Claire, I'm not sure if you wanted the other video on now or.
No, because I was going to explain something, but I didn't I just wondered if you wanted to go for some questions now. I mean, there's quite a lot in this presentation to go, and I know that.
Wow. All right, we do have about 15 minutes left, so let me just quickly get Marcel. I see that his hand is up for a while, so Marcel, you may unmute yourself. Just about 5 minutes of questions, 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay, all right. I'll keep it short, sir. All right. Claire, thank you for that one, because I figured I was going to say it was a cosmological argument, and it's one of the strong arguments that we have for the existence of God. I mean, the fact that we have a beginning and science is proving the fact that the universe has a beginning. It is shouting or screaming towards some form of designer, because there's something called a fine-tuned argument that says we're so finely tuned that it must be, it's almost screaming that said there had to be a designer to finely tune it to this type of precision. I don't remember the exact mathematical probabilities that were stated before, but they say it's almost as if the probability for this universe exists is like somebody spending 50,000 light years away and shooting an arrow and it landing bullseye. I mean, it's that great. That was more of a comment than a question.
Thank you so much for that contribution, Marcel. There are so many probabilistic, analogies that we can have, because even with astronomy, Fred Hoyle, that Claire Williams is speaking about, I actually have a quote that he likened the probability of the universe coming up as from random chance, or a random chance assembling a single cell to a tornado actually assembling a Boeing aircraft, 737 aircraft. And we know tornadoes usually destruct. So that is just an imagery of, it really takes more faith actually to believe in random chance of all that we see working together with a purpose, working together that to function, to coexist with functionality. And we will be discussing all of this even in more detail. We have a session, an entire session. We're going to have that for 2 hours on science and the Bible, whether it's compatible. That's the 28th, but yeah, certainly there's so much that we could discuss. 1.5 hours is not adequate. So if we don't have any more questions, I'm just gonna pause like for maybe 20 more seconds to see if anyone has something else they wanted to say before we just quickly conclude and then introduce our first challenge for the week. So as I said, we do have a prize for those who participate in this week's challenge, and that's coming up soon. So if you have any questions, you can let me know, or we could just go on. All right, so I'm not seeing anyone coming up now. So in the interest of time, 9 minutes left before our time should expire. Claire, I don't know if you wanted me to show the final video we had, or if you had other points that you think would be more sufficient to actually cover.
I would just say that the invitation is for people to consider some of this evidence. So it is, as Marcel said, the cosmological argument there. What makes the best sense of the universe even coming into existence? So do grab that book, what did I say? What was it called? The Sanity of Belief. Do check that out. Do check out that video again. It's at Reasonable Faith, or if you just go onto YouTube and look at Dr. Craig videos. There's so much more in this presentation, but I don't want to go into it and not be able to do it justice. But do check out these arguments, please. And thank you, Marcel, for flagging up the fine-tuning of the universe. That was what I was going to go into next. So maybe we'll have some time on the next session.
Okay, I have an interesting question that if anyone here wants to speak about, because persons have asked the question, if God exists, who made God? So we do see the law of cause and effect mentions that people usually misquote it. Let me just say, so people usually say anything that exists must have a cause. But if you actually hear, it actually says anything that has a beginning must have a cause. And so if the property that God has, or the characteristic that the God of the Bible has, is eternal, that means that the law of cause and effect doesn't apply to him because he created that law, so he must not be bound by that law anyway. So I don't know if anyone had considered that or had that question posed to them. Marcel, I see your hand up again. Sure, you may unmute.
Yeah, I love that question because if an atheist were to ever ask me that question, I would turn the question back on them because they're proposing that the universe created itself. So I'm going to ask who created their creator, because everything must have a cause according to that law. So how can they say that the universe is causeless? It makes no sense. It's not consistent. So I would just turn the question back on themselves.
All right. And then the alternative is also infinite regress. So any answer that you get, there's not going to be any end to it. But as I mentioned, the law of cause and effect actually says if something has a beginning, anything that has a beginning has a cause. So the characteristic of the God that we believe in doesn't have a beginning. He is eternal. And so the law would not apply to him. So if anyone wants to challenge, I mean, I've not heard any skeptic come on the call as yet. I mean, this forum is especial for you. Do feel welcomed, even though you have many believers here. We all are very willing to answer your questions. Don't be shy. If you feel better to write, we'll type, we will take your questions. But if not, let me just continue the discussion on a bit of implications of our worldviews. I think I wanted to just hammer home the point of the relevance of what we believe. So, you know, just in our lives as we relate to each other as human beings, if I believe that we're just evolved, we're just a product of random chance, on what basis should I consider my neighbor, for example? Why should I practice kindness, and how can I really judge as anything being right or wrong? I think that's another question that we do have to grapple as human beings in our worldviews, Claire. I think that we had that as one of our questions, a moral argument, because atheists usually ask the question, you know, if there's a loving God, why is there suffering? Why is there evil? But on what basis do you judge what's evil if you're an atheist? So I just wanted us to just maybe for 2 minutes, just discuss a bit, think about what are really the implications of what I believe on how we relate to each other and how we view each other as human beings. What is really the worldview that will make our world most habitable to live in?
Sure. That was one of the arguments I was going to be sharing this evening. So I'll just share this slide with you, which I think is quite helpful just to kind of flesh out what you were saying, Sarah. And it's this one here. I'm just quickly move through. And it's by this guy called Adam Coleman. He's a fantastic Christian apologist, African-American guy. Why is the slide not moving? Here we go. So I'm just going to zoom in here. And he says this, when he's having conversations with people who are leaving their faith, particularly Black Christians in America who are saying, you know, this is not for me, look at what happened to our people, all this kind of stuff. He says, he's asking them, he kind of challenges them to kind of explain where their moral outrage is grounded. And he says this: if everything came from nothing and the universe springs into existence for nothing, by nothing, then nothingness has no intentions. It can't confer value on anybody or anything. And so it would seem to me then that we live in a valueless universe. So of course he doesn't believe that we live in a valueless universe, because the person he's interacting with is angry to the point of saying, clearly God doesn't exist because of what happened to my people, of the suffering I'm experienced, particularly around racial injustice and such and such. So, but he's challenging to say, if you throw away God, and at the root of the universe, so we've just discussed the Kalam cosmological argument, okay, and suggesting that God makes the most sense of the universe coming to existence. But if we throw God away out of the picture and actually say at the root of the universe is nothing, it just happened and there's no mind, there's no person behind it. Nothingness cannot give you value. Nothingness doesn't have intentions. And so where does our intrinsic, our inherent human dignity come from? Well, then that makes a problem, because today I can say, Sarah, you're welcome into my community. You have all the value in the world. And then tomorrow I can change my mind. And so what happens is morality, or our human dignity, then becomes subjective. And that is no way to live, because then we see, you know, the horrors that we've seen throughout time and history. And so, yes, how we ground our outrage, which is absolutely the right response to any form of injustice that we see, makes, in my view, a better case when we say, when we point to the existence of God.
Amen. I think that's a wonderful point to basically conclude. I don't know if you have any, I don't know if Alonso was able to stay on, but if you have any concluding remarks, and then I will just introduce our challenge for this week and just a preview of what's come next week.
Can I make that concluding remark now?
Sure,
Sarah?
definitely.
I do have to go. It's been such an honor and delight to be with you all and to hear everyone's contribution, whether Candice or Marcel or Dalla. I'm sorry if I pronounced any names wrong. It was just a real delight. And Claire, that brilliant talk. May I just encourage you with this following thought as I about to leave. I've had a ton of questions the 10 years that I've been a Christian. I'm 32 now. I got saved when I was 22 years old. And I have found, as I continue to investigate those questions and follow them to the bottom, as far down as I can possibly and reasonably go, that these exercises have not been faith destroyers, but faith builders. And so I think, let your curiosity run with some of your questions. Go investigate, read the literature, watch the videos, have conversations. You have some wonderful resources there at Glow Ministries. I know they would be delighted to help you think through some of your questions. So that's been my experience, and God bless you. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you so much, Alonso. Claire, it was also very good to see you both, and thank you so much for the wonderful time that you invested in, you know, sharing with us both of your experiences and the philosophies behind what you've learned in your journey as Christians. You know, for everyone here, I mean, as a university student myself, or just completing, I know what questions are like. I've had some of my own, and those who, you know, maybe were shy to ask questions, I challenge you just to don't be shy. Just you can even email me personally, and we will see how we can do our research and converse on what you know, further on your questions. So just to quickly share what our challenge is for this week, let me move to this slide. Stop sharing.
Show all the windows.
So if you caught that or you didn't catch that, basically our question for this week is, explain to us in 1 minute or less why everyone's concept of truth cannot be valid. So it's very easy to enter. Just record your video, upload it to Facebook, or if you're not on Facebook, you can email your video to Christ.the.1, that's the numeral 1, way@gmail.com. Tag our ministry, Chosen to Glow Ministry, so we can see your videos, and add the hashtag Youth for Truth. Just caption your video with your name. If you're part of an organization like a youth, like Swallowfield Chapel, for example, Church of Christ, whatever branch you're at, and the question that you're answering. So, or challenge is open as of now, and it closes on Tuesday, September 28th at midday Jamaica time. The winner will be announced next week, God willing. And if you, the video is also posted on Chosen to Glow Ministries if you didn't catch this today. So thank you so much for joining us. I'd also encourage you to, to just continue to seek God. And as Acts 2 verse 38 says, repent and be baptized. We can have further conversations as we help you along this journey. And you will also be helping us as we converse and try to find God even more, be closer to God together. So thanks so much. And our next week, we'll be discussing, is Christianity a white man's religion? So I'm sure many of us have friends, or even personally have considered the questions that have come up. Did Christianity come from Europe? Are we forsaking our roots by following Christianity? We have many speakers. We have speakers here that are very qualified to speak on this topic, and we encourage you to tune in next week with us. And we thank you again for your time. Please spread to your contacts, and see you next time, God willing. So thanks again, and that's it for us tonight. Have a good evening. God bless you all. All right. Right. Good night. Good night, everyone. God bless you.
Thanks for coming.